It's the second piece of President Obama's jobs plan. Senate Democrats will go to the White House a little bit later this afternoon. They'll be meeting with the President and Vice President Joe Biden. And now live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Senate will come to order. Today's opening prayer will be offered by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, London, England.
Sovereign of the universe, who created all in love, teach us to love all that is good and beautiful in this world. Teach us to honor the dignity of difference, recognizing that one who is not in our image is nonetheless in your image, never forgetting that the people not like us are still people like us. At this fateful moment in the human story, bless us that we may be a blessing to others. Guide the nations of the world to honor you by honoring one another, so that by reaching out in love, we may turn enemies into friends and become your family on earth, as you are our parent in heaven. Beloved God, bless the members of this United States Congress and guide their deliberations, that they may govern this great nation with wisdom and justice, grace and compassion, bringing honor to your name and your blessing to humankind. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., November 2nd, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the senator from Connecticut, the chairman of our Homeland Security Committee, and someone who is his everyday example to the rest of us in morality and the observance that he does to his religion is something that we all admire. Senator Lieberman.
Senator from Connecticut.
Madam President, I thank the chair. I thank our leader. And I would say he and I have had many conversations about things political, which will not surprise anybody who's hearing me speak, but perhaps people will be surprised that Senator Reid and I have probably had as many conversations about matters spiritual and personal, and those conversations tie us together really forever. It is my honor to welcome to the Senate Jonathan Sacks, the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, and to thank our extraordinary chaplain, Barrett Black, for joining me in hosting the Chief Rabbi. The truth is that I knew Chief Rabbi Sacks from his writings before I knew him personally. He's written 24 books, the most recent of which was published earlier this year, called The Great Partnership, God, Science, and the Search for Meaning. His writing is extremely insightful, it's broadly accessible, and perhaps paraphrasing the old commercial which the occupant of the chair, being from New York, will remember about Levy's Jewish Rye. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's Jewish Rye. You don't have to be Jewish to benefit from Rabbi Sacks' writings. He is the sixth incumbent of the Chief Rabbinate of the United Kingdom, having served in that position since 1991. The role was formalized in 1845. He was knighted, Madam President, by Her Majesty the Queen in 2005, and then on the 27th of October 2009 was made a life peer, taking his seat in the House of Lords, where he sits on the crossbenches as Baron Sachs of Aldgate in the City of London. So we welcome Rabbi Sachs not just as the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, but as a member of a fellow legislative body. He has spoken with remarkable wisdom and insight, informed my faith in so many ways, and as I heard him give the opening prayer today, I couldn't help but think that he stands in a proud tradition that began with those remarkable Christian reformists who left England to come more than 2 or 3 centuries ago to our shores, forming the United States of America more than 2 centuries ago. And in our founding documents, responding to their faith, but also creating the foundation of the liberties that succeeding generations of Americans have enjoyed and that we in this chamber work hard to protect and strengthen every day. So I thank the chair, I thank the leader, and I particularly thank Rabbi Sachs, Chief Rabbi Sachs, for honoring us with his presence and his words today. I yield the floor.
President.
The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a pretty morning business for 1 hour. The majority will control the first half, Republicans the second half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of the Rebuild America Jobs Act. I filed cloture on the motion to proceed to this last night. If no agreement is reached, we'll vote on this tomorrow morning. I'm working with the Republican leader to come up with an expeditious way of expressing the will of the Senate in the next 24 hours or so. Madam President, tomorrow the Senate will vote, as I've just indicated, on the Rebuild America Jobs Act, which is a plan to put hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work, constructing thousands of miles of roads, bridges, runways, and train tracks. The plan is paid with a small tax, less than a penny, on every dollar a person earns in excess of $1. In excess of $1 million every year. The legislation asks millionaires and billionaires to contribute just a little bit more than they do today, a little bit more, knowing there is a price tag associated with getting our economy back on track. My Republican colleagues say they oppose this plan to hire hundreds of thousands of construction workers and rebuild our nation's collapsing infrastructure because they believe the wealthiest Americans can't afford to pay a few pennies more. But even the majority of the people who would pay this tax say that isn't true. They support our plan. This tiny fraction of American taxpayers who would pay a tiny fraction more each year are among the 1% of Americans who have done better and better and better with each passing decade. Between 1979 and 2007, the annual after-tax income of the top 1% of American wage earners has increased by 275%. That same 1% now makes more than the other 99% of Americans combined. And, Madam President, these are the latest figures because it's difficult to compile these numbers. Think what's happened in the last 4 years. They've even gotten richer and richer. I repeat, that 1% now makes more than the other 99% of Americans combined. And all that 1% of wealthy Americans would even qualify to pay this tax to fund billions of dollars in roads construction and create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Only those whose income is more than $1 million. Some billionaires and millionaires would not qualify because their income in a given year is less than $1 million. They have a lot of property, wealth, and other things of that nature. So tomorrow, my Republican colleagues will face a choice. The choice is not whether to invest in roads or bridges or whether the richest of the rich can spare a few pennies for the sake of our economy. The choice is about priorities. Who will Republicans put first? The millions of ordinary Americans struggling to find work and put food on the table, or the millionaires and billionaires whose biggest problem is that they may have to pay an additional $7,000 on the second million they make each year? We ought to be able to agree that making enough money to pay even $1 more under our plan is a wonderful problem to have. But so far, Republicans have been pretty clear what their priorities are. They unanimously voted against the Americans Jobs Act. That legislation would put more than 2 million people back to work and cut taxes for middle-class families and small businesses. Then they unanimously voted against Democrats' plan to put 400,000 teachers and tens of thousands of police officers and firefighters back to work. Republicans have cost this country millions of jobs just in the last few weeks alone. And they'll have another opportunity tomorrow to show America whose side they're on, billionaires, millionaires, or the middle class. 72% of Americans, including 54% of Republicans, want us to pass this plan. And 76% of them, including 56% of Republicans, want us to pay for it by asking the nation's wealthiest citizens to contribute their fair share. Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents know the only way out of the worst recession since the Great Depression is to invest in what this country needs, its workers, to be employed. They believe it's fair to ask those who have profited most from this country's success to help shoulder that burden. Yet Republicans have obstructed and opposed every Democratic effort to create jobs this year. Why would they do that, Madam President? Fear. Because those job creation efforts would cost the millionaires and billionaires even a dollar more? Who do they fear? The truth is they are terrified to violate the infamous Grover-Norquist tax pledge, even though they know Norquist is wrong. Or if they don't know, they should know. They're in a thrall, my Republican colleagues. They're in submission to a man whose singular focus is keeping taxes low for the very, very, very wealthy, no matter what the effect is on this nation. They fear his political retribution. But I hope my Republican colleagues will heed this message sent yesterday by former Republican Senator Alan Simpson, a conservative bona fide, regarding Grover-Norquist and his pledge. He said, the only power Norquist yields is the power you give him. Senator Simpson went on to say, he can't murder you, he can't burn your house. The only thing he'd do is try to defeat you for re-election. And if that means more to you than your country, you really shouldn't be in Congress. That's what Simpson said. I believe most senators, and certainly most Americans, know that legislating isn't simple. It's not as simple as a mindless pledge. So those senators must have the courage to act on those convictions that I hope they have, I believe they have. As British historian Thomas Fuller once said, and I quote, "Better break your word than do worse in keeping it."
Madam President.
Republican leader.
There's no denying the fact that the policies of the past 2.5 years have made a bad situation worse. For 2.5 years, the Democrats completely dominated this town. They got everything they wanted. And what happened? Unemployment has hovered around 8% for 32 months. The so-called misery index is worse than it's been in more than 25 years. Actually, unemployment's hovered around 9%. Consumer confidence is at levels last seen during the height of the financial crisis. But if there's one number that really stands out, it's this: 1.5 million. That's the number of fewer jobs we now have in this country since the day President Obama signed his signature jobs bill into law. These are just some of the numbers that all of us, Republicans and Democrats, read about every single day. But it's not the numbers that compel us to action. It's the stories that lie behind them. It's the millions of men and women who've seen their dreams shattered, their lives upended, and their potential unfulfilled. And what Republicans have been saying is that if we truly want to help improve the situation we're in, if we really want to turn this ship around, then we need to learn from our mistakes and take a totally different approach. Well, we know what policies haven't worked. We've tried that. What sense does it make to try those same policies again and again? And that's why Republicans in the House and the Senate have been taking a different approach. Democrats may control the White House, they may control the Senate, but for the past 10 months, Republicans in the other half of Congress have done their best to correct the mistakes and excesses of the previous 2.5 years and set us on a different course. And they've done something else that Democrats have not done over the past few years. Week after week, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives has been passing bills that actually have a chance of gaining bipartisan support and becoming law. They're actually trying to do something. Unlike the President and the Democrats who run the Senate, House Republicans are designing legislation to pass rather than fail. They want to make a difference rather than make a point. And the only thing keeping these bills from becoming law is that the Democrats in the Senate won't take them up. Now, we know the President's strategy. His so-called jobs bill has one purpose, and only one: to divide us. Just this morning, I read a story that quoted some Democratic operative almost bragging about the fact that they don't expect any of the legislation the President's been out there talking about on the bus tour to pass. They openly admit these bills are designed to fail. It's not exactly a state secret that Republicans, and yes, some Democrats, don't think we should be raising taxes right now on the very people we're counting on to create the jobs we need to get us out of the jobs crisis. And yet the one thing that every single proposal Democrats bring to the floor has in common, it does just that. So the Democrats' plan is to keep putting up bills on the floor they know ahead of time we'll vote against, instead of trying to solve the problem. And they don't even hide it. The President's top strategist actually issued a memo a few weeks ago saying the President would use this legislation not as a way to help people, but as a way to pummel Republicans. Meanwhile, House Republicans have passed bill after bill after bill that are actually designed to do something. On March the 31st, they passed H.R. 872, the Reducing Regulatory Burdens Act. It got 57 Democratic votes. 57 Democratic votes in the House. A bipartisan bill that could pass and become law. On April 7th, they passed H.R. 910, the Energy Tax Prevention Act. It got 19 Democratic votes. And on and on. There are 15 of these, Madam President, 15 of them that have passed each with significant Democratic support. One with 33, one with 28, one with 21, one with 23, one with 16, one with 10, one with 47 votes. So there are 15 of these bills that have passed the House with bipartisan support, and here in the Senate, we don't take any of them up because we're busy taking up bills that everybody knows are not going to pass. This week over in the House, they're going to pass 4 more bills making it easier to hire out-of-work Americans. And just last week, House Republicans passed a bill that would repeal a law requiring the IRS to withhold 3% of future tax payments from any company that does business with the government. A bill the President himself said he'd be willing to sign into law. 170 Democrats voted for it. Why don't we pass it here in the Senate? The President's waiting to sign it. This is just the latest example of a simple bipartisan bill that struggling businesses are begging us to pass. But the Senate Democrats are holding it up right now because it doesn't fit the storyline. Now, I'm not saying we have to vote on every one of the bills that the House passed just as they are. There's an amendment process for that. But why not take them up? Every one would help create jobs, and none would raise taxes. That's what we call compromise. It's called finding common ground. And it's how the American people expect us to legislate. What we're witnessing in Washington right now is 2 very different styles of governance. A Republican majority in the House that believes we should actually do something about the problems we face, and which has put together and actually passed bipartisan legislation that would help address those problems. And a Democratic majority here in the Senate that's teamed up with the White House on a strategy of doing nothing. Nothing. All for the sake of trying to score political points and spread the blame for an economy that their own policies have cemented into place as they look ahead to an election that's still more than a year away. Now, the President's economic policies have failed to do what he said they would, and now he's designing legislation to fail. Americans are actually tired of failure. So Republicans are inviting Democrats to join us in succeeding at something, anything, around here that would make a difference. I guess to sum it up, Madam President, what we're saying is this: why don't we quit playing the political games? The problems we face are entirely too serious to ignore. Let's take up bipartisan bills House Republicans have already passed and actually do something. There is no better time to tackle the problems we face than now. Let's not squander this moment because some political strategist over at the White House is enamored with their own re-election strategy. Let's take advantage of this moment when the two parties share power in Washington to act. As I often note, it's only when the two parties share power that they can share the credit and the blame. That's why some of the biggest legislative achievements have taken place at moments like this. And that's why I've been calling on Democrats in Washington privately and publicly for the past year to follow the example of those Congresses and those presidents before us who were wise enough to seize an opportunity like this one for the good of the country. We face many serious crises as a nation. We know how to solve them. Let's not let this moment pass us by. Now, Madam President, on another issue. I want to express my thanks and appreciation to one of Kentucky's hardest working public servants at the end of a long career. Charles Frank Rapier, the Executive Director of the Appalachian High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. It's kind of a mouthful. We have a way to shorten that. It's called Appalachia HIDTA. Will be retiring this November after 46 years in law enforcement. This guy is a bit of a legend, Madam President. Director Rapier, called Frank by his friends, has been leading the Appalachian HIDTA program since 2003. Prior to his appointment, he served as Deputy Director of that program for Kentucky. The Appalachia HIDTA program was established in 1998 to combat one of our country's greatest problems, illegal drug trafficking and drug abuse. The problem of drug abuse that Frank has pledged his career to fighting is particularly bad in my home state of Kentucky. Kentucky ranks in the top 3 of marijuana-producing states. More Kentuckians died of drug overdoses in 2009 than in fatal car crashes, an astonishing 82 per month. The threat from illegal meth use poses a problem across the state as well. This rampant drug abuse increases crime and destroys families in Kentucky. Under Frank's leadership, Appalachia HIDTA has attacked drug trafficking organizations in the tri-state area of Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee head-on. And let me say, Madam President, that he's done an amazing job, a truly amazing job. Specifically, in 2009, Appalachia HIDTA disrupted or dismantled 82 separate drug trafficking organizations. That translates into hundreds of thousands of marijuana plants destroyed and hundreds of arrests. In 2006, they kept an estimated $1 billion worth of profits off of illegal drug activities out of the state of Kentucky. Frank played an integral role in arranging a visit to Kentucky earlier this year by Gil Kurlikowski, the director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, better known as the nation's drug czar. The director's visit, which I was proud to help facilitate, has been an important step in maintaining our focus in Kentucky to stem drug abuse and save our family members, friends, and neighbors from the dangers of drug addiction and drug-related crimes during a time of shrinking federal resources. As a strong supporter of efforts to fight drug abuse in Kentucky, I've gotten to know Frank and see firsthand his efforts. He's a humble man, but he's highly respected in the law enforcement community throughout the state, and even the nation, for that matter, for the wonderful job he has done. I know his dedication and leadership in this important fight against illegal drugs will be greatly missed. Frank knows the area he's worked so hard to protect well. Born and raised in Corbin, Kentucky, he received his bachelor's degree from Eastern Kentucky University, where he began his law enforcement service as an EKU campus police officer. He attended graduate school at Xavier University, served as an instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy at Glencoe, Georgia, has taught at numerous police academies, and has been a speaker at many law enforcement conferences. Before working with Appalachia HIDTA, Frank was a special agent with the U.S. Treasury Department for 32 years. He was a member of the National Undercover Resource Pool and the National Response Team. Over the course of his long career, he has served many assignments with the U.S. Secret Service and State Department, including working as a member of the Southeast Bomb Task Squad that investigated the Olympic bombing case in Atlanta in 1996. While with the Treasury Department, Frank received 4 Special Achievement Awards, a Special Act Award, a Performance Award, and a Director's Award, Messengale Memorial Award. Now, after 46 years in law enforcement, I want to wish Frank congratulations on a job well done and best wishes in his retirement. Countless Kentuckians owe their thanks to Frank as well. Frank regularly describes the practice of asking his granddad, "What did you do in the war?" He feels prepared to be asked the same question himself now as he nears the end of his career. He knows someday there will be an accounting. He's worked all of his professional life so that his answer to that question can be, "I fought back against the tide of illegal drugs and saved lives." He has certainly done that and more. So I know my colleagues in the U.S. Senate join me in thanking Director Rapier for decades of service. The work he's done for so many years have created a safer, stronger Kentucky. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business, 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Madam President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, I rise today to speak in favor of the Rebuild America Jobs Act. I want to first just clarify for folks, because it's a little confusing. We have had several proposals to create jobs that have come to the floor here in the last several weeks, and they have similar names. The one before us today is the Rebuild America Jobs Act, and it is a portion of the larger American Jobs Act that President Obama proposed and set out for the Congress to consider in September. Let me talk first about that larger bill which the President proposed. This American Jobs Act that the President proposed would have a very significant and beneficial impact on my state of New Mexico. Under that legislation, there would be payroll tax cuts for about 40,000 businesses in my state. There would be an expansion of payroll tax cuts for workers that would provide a typical New Mexico household with a median income of $44,000 with a tax cut of about $1,360 per year. There would be support for up to 2,600 construction jobs in upgrading public schools. There would be $20 million to revitalize vacant and foreclosed businesses and homes. There would be over $49 million for New Mexico community colleges. There would be unemployment insurance reforms that could help put 32,000 unemployed New Mexicans back to work. And there is funding in that legislation for up to 3,100 teachers and police officers and responders to keep those people on the job so that they can continue to provide services to our schools, to our students, to our communities. But despite the fact that all of these important investments would be fully paid for, and that is made clear in the legislation, so not a single dollar would be added to the national debt. This legislation, this comprehensive legislation, was blocked by a filibuster by our Republican colleagues a couple of weeks ago. I commend Senator Reid for continuing to fight to keep job creation on top of the legislative agenda and for bringing up parts of this broader legislation independently to see if we can get support for any of these individual parts, because each of them have a great deal of merit. 2 weeks ago, we voted on the Teachers and First Responders Back to Work Act. This would have helped states and local governments keep over 400,000 teachers and police and firefighters on the job during these tough economic times. And it was disappointing to me that this effort failed to get enough votes so that we could go ahead and consider the bill. The legislation we're discussing today would provide $50 billion in infrastructure investments in highways and transit, in rail projects across the country, and in doing so, in doing those investments, it would create thousands of jobs. Among other things, it would put Americans to work in improving 150,000 miles of roads, 4,000 miles of train tracks, restoring 150 miles of airport runways, and in implementing the next-gen air traffic modernization efforts that this Congress should be strongly supporting. Those are efforts to improve air safety and to reduce delays in air traffic. So passage of this legislation would mean at least $284 million in my home state of New Mexico in immediate infrastructure investments. And that investment of $284 million would support a minimum of 3,700 local jobs. These resources are greatly needed in my state. The Federal Highway Administration estimates that about 22% of New Mexico's major roads are in poor or mediocre condition. 19% of our bridges are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, according to the Federal Highway Administration. In addition, the bill includes $10 billion to establish an independent national infrastructure bank in order to leverage private and public funds in advancing a broad range of infrastructure projects through loans and loan guarantees. Under this proposal, it was modeled after bipartisan legislation introduced by Senators Kerry and Hutchison earlier this year. The bank would help finance large-scale transportation and water and energy projects that are of national and regional significance. I'm glad to see that the infrastructure bank included in this bill would begin to address some of the significant challenges we have of stimulating investment in new energy projects. There's simply not enough capital available in the country to deploy these technologies at the scale that we need to deploy them to meet our national security objectives and to remain competitive in growing international markets for clean energy technologies. So the availability of this type of financing through this National Infrastructure Bank could be helpful in developing the transmission capacity required to bring renewable energies developed in my state of New Mexico to communities throughout the country. Madam President, let me also briefly comment on the fact that there is revenue raised in order to pay for this set of investments that are being proposed here. That is, there is a so-called offset for the cost of this legislation. And that's because I think all of us agree that the deficit is at unsustainable levels. We should not be committing to increased spending without finding a way to pay for it. And that's why this legislation contains a revenue-raising provision. The legislation would impose a 0.7% surtax on income exceeding $1 million. Now, what does that mean? That means that if your annual income is $1 million, then this legislation does not in any way change the taxes you're required to pay. So any garden variety millionaire who only receives $1 million per year in income is not required to pay any more under this legislation. But if you exceed that and your income is $1,100,000, for example, you would have to pay an extra $700 toward the cost of this legislation. The reality is that modernizing our nation's infrastructure and stimulating job growth and enhancing policies to assist with our economic recovery does cost money. We all wish it did not, but it does. Frankly, if we are going to give more than just lip service to addressing our persistent deficits, I think it's reasonable to ask the wealthiest among us to pitch in to move America forward, to get this economy moving again. In New Mexico, less than 0.1% of taxpayers would be impacted by this modest surtax. That means that 99.9% of New Mexicans would not be impacted at all, and the handful of filers who would be impacted would only pay the surtax on the portion of their annual income that exceeds $1 million. Madam President, I strongly believe this legislation, the Rebuild America Jobs Act, which we're going to try to proceed to tomorrow, or whenever we can get consent from our Republican colleagues to proceed to it, I believe it's important legislation. It's an important step in turning our economy around. I urge my colleagues to support it. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Delaware.
Madam President, I rise today because this week, once again, the Senate of the United States has the opportunity to create jobs, to find a way to work together to make a real difference in the long-term strength of this nation and to finally punch back against this recession which has taken so much from the working families of our states. I rise in support of the Rebuilding America Jobs Act, a bill that will invest $60 billion in our nation's crumbling infrastructure and put hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work. Investments in America's infrastructure are investments in America's future, and they could not come at a more critical time for our country, our communities, or our future. The rest of the world is pouring money into its infrastructure because they know that it will not only make it easier for them to recover from this recession, they know it will make them more competitive for their long-term future, for their people, for their countries, for their economies. So at a time when our competitors are pouring money into fixing, expanding, building their infrastructure, we've turned off the spigot. We are starving, Madam President, our roads and our bridges, our sewers and our water systems, our tunnels, our ports, our runways, our railroad tracks. We are starving them of the repairs they need to function properly, not just today, but to lay the groundwork for our competitiveness for the next generation of Americans. China today, one of our greatest economic competitors, is spending 9% of their GDP on infrastructure. As anyone who's visited China in recent years knows, all across the nation of China, there are gleaming new highway systems, brand new ports, brand new airports and runways, brand new transportation infrastructure that connects newly built cities, leaping from the ground as if by magic, because they've invested enormous amounts in a modern infrastructure. Europe broadly is investing 5% of GDP in modernizing their infrastructure, and in the United States, where modern infrastructure has for a generation made us the envy of the world, we are today investing just 2%. Just 2% of our GDP. This is foolish. Few people argue that infrastructure isn't important, Madam President. In fact, it's one of the few things that seems to enjoy broad support here in this chamber, in this city, and in this country. Folks as disparate as the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce agree that investing in modernizing our infrastructure is critical, not just to putting Americans back to work, but to getting America working for our country's future. They support both the idea of an infrastructure bank because they know that investing in infrastructure isn't just about rebuilding our roads, it's about rebuilding our economy. When companies make decisions about where to locate, about where to build a new factory, about where to expand production, about where to lease a new office, infrastructure is always at or near the top of their list. Proximity to a highway means everything if you're going to run or expand a factory. Being close to a port is critical if your products need to be exported overseas. And access to airports and railways is imperative if you want to do business outside your community or our country. High-speed internet can be every bit as important as these century-old transportation technologies and can be every bit as important as clean water, modern ports, or new railroads. Infrastructure is important in every state of our nation, Madam President, and especially so in my coastal state of Delaware. The Port of Wilmington brings 4 million tons of goods through Delaware each year, providing high-wage, high-skilled jobs to the longshoremen and the communities immediately around our port that rely so much on its vital link to the global economy. Railways allow Amtrak to connect businessmen and women from New York to our financial services sector, to our legal and banking community in Wilmington, and it's one of the busiest railroad stations in America. And I-95, that East Coast corridor, connects truckers and motorists up and down the East Coast to our little state. But as folks have known for far too long, one of the worst choke points in the whole East Coast on I-95 was in our state. I used to get calls all the time, Madam President, in my role as county executive because folks mistakenly thought it was somehow my role to modernize this highway. It was John F. Kennedy who cut the ribbon on this modern interstate highway, and we frankly have failed to invest in keeping up with the times, in keeping up with the growth in traffic, in keeping up with the tempo of global commerce since then. Delaware has finally solved these problems, Madam President, with the leadership of the Obama administration and this chamber, the investments that were made in infrastructure over the last 2 years. We finally have solved that choke point on I-95. And today, motorists move through at great speed, pay their tolls to Delaware, yes, and are able to get on their way north or south and engage in commerce at the speed that the modern economy demands. That's what we seek here to do nationwide. That's what the Rebuilding America's Jobs Act can do. For the last 25 or 30 years, we've been building off the infrastructure built by our parents' generation, hoping that a little bandage here, a little ointment there, a little wire, a little bubble gum would be enough to get us through another year, but that's not a strategy for laying the groundwork for a great future for our children. It's not even a strategy for keeping up. The choke points on America's roads can't be allowed to choke America's economy for the next generation. 1/3 of our nation's major roadways are in poor or even mediocre condition, and 1/4 of our bridges have been rated structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. We've even faced the human suffering and the reputational disaster of having bridges collapse across this country in recent years. We have failed to invest in our future. And as a country, we can keep swerving to avoid these potholes, but eventually we're going to hit them. The Rebuilding America's Jobs Act would fill that pothole, would make smooth the rough places of this nation, and accelerate our economic growth for the future. I am a co-sponsor of the Rebuilding America Jobs Act, Madam President, because this bill would fill the pothole we've been avoiding for decades. It would rebuild 150,000 miles of American roadways, maintain 4,000 miles of train tracks, upgrade 150 miles of airport runways. It would restore critical drinking water and wastewater systems for our communities and strengthen our energy infrastructure. In short, Madam President, it would make us competitive. It would put people back to work. It would get us on the right road to a sustained recovery. It would put hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work in that sector of economy that took the first and hardest hit from the recession. More than 2 million Americans who worked in construction have lost their jobs since this tragic recession hit, including 8,000 in my home state of Delaware alone. And we've got thousands of folks in the skilled building trades ready to go. They just need us to get over our differences, find a way past these endless, mindless filibusters, and get them to work. This week we have an opportunity to invest in those people and invest in our country. Infrastructure is such a smart investment, and in this economy and in this competitive global environment where our allies and competitors are outstripping our investment because they see clearly the road to the future, we simply cannot afford to continue to refuse to act. Madam President, it was 1 year ago today that the people of Delaware elected me to represent them in Washington, and every day since I have wondered when this chamber was finally going to come together across the partisan divide and start moving on jobs. The persistent partisanship here that has plagued this body is, in my view, not worthy of the very real human needs of the people who sent us here. And last month, folks in this Congress, mostly from the other party, prevented us from acting on jobs not once, not twice, but several times. I don't understand the strategy here, but the endless filibusters must stop. I know there's debate over how we're going to pay for this particular proposal to put $60 billion into infrastructure, but as Senator Bingaman commented just before me, this is a modest increase in revenue for the very wealthiest Americans that I believe is justified in this critical economic time. Too many of my neighbors, too many of my constituents are out of work. And, Madam President, I don't think we have a choice. We need to act. The President is right. We can't wait to act. The Rebuilding America's Jobs Act not only invests in jobs today, but in our economy for tomorrow. We can't wait any longer, Madam President, to fill this pothole. This bill deserves bipartisan support, and I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for it this week. With that, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Alaska.
Madam President, I have 6 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise to speak also on the Rebuild America Jobs Act. Our nation's infrastructure is in a state of disrepair. We see it in the potholes in our streets, in the congested highways and public transit that lack the capacity to safely and efficiently get Americans where they need to go. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives our nation's infrastructure a D grade. 1 in 4 bridges in the United States is structurally deficient. Our deteriorating infrastructure has a negative impact on commerce and our economy. We no longer have an infrastructure system that is the envy of the world. When you invest in public infrastructure, you have 2 results. You create immediate construction jobs, and you lay the foundation, the groundwork, to improve communities and facilitate commerce. That was certainly my experience when I was mayor of Anchorage. I became mayor in 2003 at a time of an economic slowdown. Not quite as bad as our national economy that we face today, but we inherited huge budget deficits, a dramatic slowdown in our economy. Our answer was to turn Anchorage around was to invest in our basic systems of roads and water and sewer and power, basic infrastructure. One of the best examples of the public infrastructure investment was a small community in the northern part of Anchorage called Mountain View. We knew there was great potential for economic turnaround in this community. We knew it because the community was interested. But the public infrastructure hadn't been invested in that community in decades. We did some simple things at first. Upgraded the roads, the basic systems that move people from one end of Mountain View to the other. We invested in schools. And then we invested in some public facilities. Today, Mountain View is a home of one of our large credit unions, one of their branches, which is now their top performer in new accounts. Also, new retail is established there, restaurant, phone stores, housing developments where no housing was being developed in this neighborhood. Matter of fact, this neighborhood used to be the place, and I know it well because I grew up not far from here. It was the neighborhood where people lived and then they tried to figure out how to move out of the neighborhood. Today, it's a community of choice, a place where people want to go to. Well over 140 housing units developed in this community in the last 5 years. Also, additional public offices. The library, for the first time, developed there in over 22 years. Simple investments created private sector investment along with it. Another example, we built a new $100 million convention center in our downtown Anchorage. The new Denida Center is now an economic engine attracting bigger conventions and meetings, tens of thousands of visitors per year. In September alone, the new convention center generated almost $12 million in revenue, supporting restaurants, shops, and hotels. Again, someone born and raised in Anchorage, I remember when downtown, again, businesses were fleeing the downtown. They saw it as not an opportunity for economic development. By making these simple investments can have a long-term impact. This may sound, $100 million, like a lot of money. Let me give you another example. $40,000 we invested in just improved street lights in a small part of downtown along G Street. Property owners had legitimate concerns of safety after dark, and there's one thing, when winter hits in Alaska, there's less light, a lot of less light. So we invested about $40,000 to invest in installing some simple street lights, a dozen or so along the road there. The result, the character of the street has dramatically changed. We've seen 10 new businesses spring up in a 3-block section of G Street because it's safer. People move freely at any time of the day. There are year-round retail and restaurant businesses such as Urban Greens and JoJo A Go-Go, Modern Dwellers, Alaska Cake Studio, and Octopus Inc. Variety of new businesses, retailers investing their hard-earned capital, reaching out to expand the opportunity for Anchorage. These businesses probably would not have made the investment without the small investment of the public infrastructure. Madam President, in my view, we need to follow this model on a national level. Failure to invest in our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, airports, will cost us nearly 1 million American jobs without this investment. Our economy is incredibly important to continue to move forward by moving legislation like Rebuild America Jobs Act. It is an opportunity to reverse this trend while helping to put hundreds of thousands of people back to work. This could put Alaskans to work on important projects. Bridge repairs outside the Denali National Park on the Parks Highway, a critical route between Alaska's 2 population centers and a heavily traveled route for our tour operators and shippers. Intersection upgrades on 2 of the busiest roads in downtown Fairbanks. Highway safety improvements along the Seward Highway outside of Anchorage that reduce deadly traffic accidents and delays. Safety improvements along the Sterling Highway on the Kenai Peninsula, another area of high visitor traffic in the summer. We know these improvements will support local economic growth all around Alaska, which is still a very young state compared to many states, and has a tremendous transportation need. 2 years ago, this Congress approved the Recovery Act, which funded sorely needed projects across my state. Projects like the Gustavus Dock, the Alaska Railroad line improvements, Glen Highway repairs, and airport upgrades. These all created immediate construction jobs and have also improved access points so private companies can increase revenues and create long-term jobs. The Rebuild America Jobs Act not only provides desperately needed repair funds, it also provides the seed money for the National Infrastructure Bank that will attract private sector capital to help fund a broad range of national significant projects. The concept for the Infrastructure Bank has broad bipartisan support and is currently being championed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Moody's estimates for every $1 spent on roads and water and sewer, the basic infrastructure of this country, GDP is raised by $1.59. The Rebuild America Jobs Act would make some key investments. $27 billion to rebuild roads and bridges, $9 billion to invest in public transit, $3 billion to invest in our airports and modernization of our air traffic control system, which will make aviation more efficient and safer. For Alaskans, this investment would fund $220 million in much-needed transportation improvements and modernization, which of course means good jobs, an estimated 2,900 jobs in Alaska from this bill. Infrastructure development and investment has historically been a bipartisan effort. The American people want Congress to work together. This is a good bill to deal with our nation's roads and bridges and rails and ports and runways. Madam President, let me close by just saying, you know, I've been now here almost 3 years, and we have some good bills that pass, and we argue over some that we wish would pass. You know, we've had some success over the last couple of weeks here. When you think about the China currency bill, the 3 trade bills, now we have a bill, and we've put 3 jobs bills up. 2 have not been able to pass because of opposition from the other side. But here's when we know bipartisan support. The Infrastructure Bank. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce is actively promoting this because they see the melding of public and private sector moving together to invest in the future of this economy. They also know that when you lay those roads down or that better infrastructure on rail or transit, the net result is private sector investment will occur right after it or simultaneously. So I would hope that folks on the other side would make the decision that it is wise to invest today and move this bill forward so we can have a long-term economic impact for our country. Madam President, I yield the floor. I noted absence of the quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, as we debate here in the United States Senate how to get our economy going again, deal with what is a stagnant economic set of circumstances, something that we've been grappling with now for a few years, I think it's instructive to look at what's happening in Europe. It was interesting to me as you look at even the morning papers this morning, the front page of the Wall Street Journal, fears of political chaos tank global markets as Europe's bailout plan teeters. And then much of the paper today, at least in the news reporting, is all about what's happening in Europe and the Greek crisis and the sovereign debt crisis that's being experienced in that country. The business page, New York Times, aftershocks for Athens and Wall Street, European debt crisis tightens its chokehold on global markets. A whole series of stories again there about the same issue. Front page of the Washington Post above the fold, Europe bailout again in doubt. Greece seeks referendum. My point, Madam President, very simply is that as we have observed now what's happening in Europe, it should be a lesson to us and a warning sign about the things that we need to be doing to get our economy back on track in this country. What is really saddling Europe right now is the fact that the European governments have gotten too big for their economies to support. And so they are drowning in all this debt. They have debt to GDP ratios that exceed the levels, way exceed the levels normally that are required for admission into the European Union, and yet they continue to struggle with these huge amounts of debt, much of which was created over a long period of time. It didn't happen overnight. It's something that many of their governments just frankly made promises they couldn't keep. And so now they're dealing with that and trying to figure out how they're going to work their way out of it, and it's becoming increasingly concerning, I think, to people all across the globe and certainly here to us in the United States. And if you look at the debt to GDP ratios in some of these countries around the world, they're pretty staggering. Greece is somewhere in the 180% debt to GDP area. You've got Portugal, Spain, countries like that in some cases in excess of 200% debt to GDP. Well, where are we in this country? We're already at about 100%. We're 1-to-1. Our debt to GDP now is at a level that we haven't seen literally since the end of World War II. Spending as a percentage of our economy, debt as a percentage of our economy, deficits as a percentage of our economy, all at historic highs relative to any time in history, at least recent history going back to World War II. And so I think that hopefully the lesson and the takeaway from all this is that we have got to get our fiscal house in order. We are in a deep hole. We cannot continue to dig that hole deeper. And that's why when I hear the discussion about how to revive our economy, and I hear it sort of revolve around we need to have more government intervention, we need to have more government spending, that to me is clearly a warning sign that we're on the wrong path, because that is exactly what has happened in Europe. Governments have gotten too big, their economies can no longer support them, and they're now faced with these untenable circumstances, serious, dramatic austerity measures accompanied by contracting economies, all of which is leading to just a complete mess in Europe, hopefully one that will not spill over into this country and around the globe. But that concern clearly exists today, which is why you see so many of these headlines in our American papers focusing on that particular issue. So my point, Madam President, is simply this. I think that as we look at how we deal with our economy here in the United States, it starts with balancing our budget, getting our fiscal house in order, trying to get that debt and spending as a percentage of our economy down to more normal historic levels. If you go back over the past 40 years in American history, our spending as a percentage of our GDP has been in the 20 to 21% range on average. That's a 40-year historical average. Incidentally, the 5 times that we have balanced the budget since 1969, and there have only been 5 times, regrettably, where we have actually balanced the budget, the spending to GDP ratio was 18.7% average. So clearly in those times when we balanced the budget going back to 1969, those 5 years, we had an economy obviously that was expanding and growing, but also we had government spending under control at a reasonable level. Well, today we're in the 24 to 25% range spending as a percentage of our economy, and again, debt to GDP now literally 100%, something we haven't seen, really historic in terms of our country's economy and our fiscal situation in this country. And I think what it suggests is this, that we cannot spend our way out of this. We can't borrow our way out of this. all we do is we compound a situation, make it worse rather than better. And I think we've already seen that in the first couple of years of this presidency. President Obama, when he came into office, had a very aggressive agenda. He wanted to expand the role of government. And so we had a stimulus program funded with borrowed money that was focused on government spending, government stimulating the economy. We had a massive new health care bill, $2.5 trillion cost when it's fully implemented. That was a big expansion, the biggest expansion of government that we've seen literally in the last 40 years. We've seen excessive regulation to the point that there are now 61,000 pages of new regulations that have been issued or pushed through since this president took office, all of which, again, compounds, I think, and makes worse the problem that we have of growing spending as a percentage of GDP, growing debt as a percentage of GDP, and a shrinking private economy, or at least an economy that's not growing at the rate that we would like to see, and continuing to run unemployment rates that are north of 9%. So these are serious economic circumstances, and worsened, I believe, by the policies that have been put in place since this president took office. So I believe we need to take a different approach. We need to move in a different direction. We can't continue to double down on things that we know don't work. And clearly, government spending, government stimulus of the economy, if the last stimulus bill is any indication of that, certainly hasn't worked. So much of what I hear being talked about now from my colleagues on the other side and from this administration is very similar to that. We're talking about a lot of the same prescriptions for our economy. We need to spend more here, which of course entails more borrowing, or higher taxes on the people who create jobs in this country. And in fact, the more recent iterations of that have entailed a tax increase on people who create jobs, permanent tax increase, I might add, to pay for temporary spending programs, temporary spending ideas that have already proven not to work. And so it seems really ironic in a way that we're having that discussion. It strikes me, at least, that there are lots of other things that we ought to be thinking about if we're serious about getting the economy, American economy, back on track and growing and expanding again. Of course, we all talked about the issue of taxes. Taxes are clearly an issue when it comes to our competitive place in the world and our ability to compete with other countries around the world. We continue to see companies move jobs to other places because our tax structure in this country is not competitive. We have the second highest tax on business in the entire world right now, which I think makes us anti-competitive and makes it more difficult for us to attract jobs and investment in this country. We had, as I said, a regulatory structure that is this spinning out of control in terms of new regulations, new mandates, new requirements on American businesses. Quite simply, we are making it more costly and more difficult for American businesses to create jobs when we ought to be looking at how we can make it less difficult and less costly, less expensive, cheaper, if you will, to create jobs in this country. And so that's where we ought to be looking. And I think a couple of things that strike me that really fit into that debate. One is tax reform. I think getting tax rates down on businesses and individuals, broadening the tax base is something that we really ought to be having a debate about. And tax reform that would put policies in place that are going to be there for a while, that there's some permanence to. We continue to change tax law every year or two, and that kind of economic uncertainty makes it very difficult for American businesses to invest. I mean, who in their right mind is going to make investments based upon a set of policies that are going to be in place for, at best 2 years, at worst maybe a year? And that's how we've been setting tax policy of late. So creating economic certainty through more permanent tax changes, but tax changes, I would argue, Madam President, that promote long-term economic growth, not decision-making that is, designed perhaps for people to in the near term, do something that might give us a little bit of economic pop in the next 6 to 12 months, but something that actually puts in place conditions where businesses will make long-term investments, create long-term, good-paying jobs right here in America. And so I think that that's the kind of economic debate that we need to be having. And frankly, instead of talking about redistribution of wealth or redistribution of income, which is so often what we hear coming out of the White House. We ought to be talking about what can we do to promote economic growth. How can we get this economy expanding and growing in a way, and what are the policies that will make that happen? Tax reform clearly, in my view, is one, and tax reform that is focused on getting rates down, making us more competitive with the rest of the world. And then I think we ought to have a debate about what we're going to do with these regulations. These regulations really are out of control. And there are a series of things that have been passed by the other body, by the House of Representatives, which they call the Forgotten 15. And there are a whole series of things dealing with domestic energy production and development, doing away with some of these costly regulations. All these things are things. These are pieces of legislation, bills, that have passed in the House of Representatives already this year. Since we came in January and this new session of Congress, there are 15 bills that have passed in the House of Representatives that haven't been acted on here in the Senate. Now, many of us have tried and will continue to try to get votes on some of these things as amendments, perhaps, to bills that might be moving through the Senate. But if we're serious about supporting policies that will create the right conditions for economic growth, it seems to me at least that we could start by taking things that have passed the House with broad bipartisan support. These are policies that have already been come through one body of the Congress that we could put on the floor and the agenda here in the United States Senate that really would impact the economy and the job creators in this country, all things that we've heard people say that they want and they need. Now, if you look at the number of regulations coming out of Washington, D.C., and what it would take in terms of our job creators to comply with all that, it's an astonishing 82 million hours. 82 million hours to comply at a cost of $80 billion. That's what these new regulations that are coming out of Washington just in this last year, or since this administration has taken office, that's the cost to our economy of all these new requirements that are being imposed upon our businesses. The regulations, excessive red tape, we know kills jobs, it increases our dependence upon foreign oil, and it imposes costs on our businesses that we just frankly can't afford. And if you look at what federal regulation costs job creators annually, it's somewhere along the order of $1.75 trillion. Now, that's the whole composite of all the regulations that exist on the books today, not those that have just been enacted since this administration came to power. But they've taken it to a whole new level. And it's interesting because the chairman of the Business Roundtable and chairman, president, and CEO of Boeing Company, a gentleman named Jim McNerney, in a Wall Street Journal op-ed printed this Monday, noted the following. And I quote, "A tsunami of new rules and regulations from an alphabet soup of federal agencies is paralyzing investment and increasing by tens of billions of dollars the compliance costs for small and large businesses." He goes on to say, "What we face is a jobs crisis, and regulators charged with protecting the interests of the people are making worse the problem that's hurting them now. An increasingly skeptical business community needs proof Washington can put America on a sustainable fiscal footing and promote economic growth." So the recognition that we've got to get our fiscal house in order, the recognition that these alphabet soup of federal agencies are paralyzing investment, increasing by tens of billions of dollars the compliance costs for large and small businesses, is what this particular CEO, who leads a large business organization in this country, has put his finger on in terms of the things that we need to get the economy in this country growing again. And so I would hope that as we continue to have this discussion in the Senate, rather than focusing, again, on raising taxes on people who create jobs, and that's what these proposals that have been put in front of us would do. We had one we voted on the last time we were in, week before last. We've got one we're probably going to have a vote on sometime this week, essentially saying we are going to raise taxes on job creators, permanently raise taxes on job creators, to pay for spending programs, temporary spending programs that have already proven not to work. That doesn't sound like a jobs plan to me. That seems to me like another failed attempt, futile attempt to have Washington become relevant to this debate, knowing full well that it really is the job creators out there in this country. It's our private economy where the jobs are really going to be created. Now, I would also argue, Madam President, that this is as the American people follow this debate, this is a very, very a real issue for them because it affects their jobs. It's something they care deeply and profoundly about. Economic issues, bread and butter issues, kitchen table issues are the things that the American people focus on. And so I think they care deeply about this debate, and they should, because what we do here impacts them and their children and grandchildren for generations to come. If you think about the fact that today we have a $15 trillion federal debt, and what that translates into per family in this country, it's about $126,000 per family. Every family owes their share of the federal debt, $126,000. Now, compound that by when you add up the total unfunded liabilities of our federal government, which now total about over $60 trillion, and those are the obligations that we have to pay Social Security and Medicare benefits for future generations, that share of that unfunded liability per family in this country exceeds $500,000 per family. And that exceeds the amount that they pay for their mortgage, for all the other things that are combined in their daily lives. You take their mortgage payment, their car payments, the payments that they're making on their student loans, all those sorts of things, all are exceeded by the amount, the mortgages in effect that they have because of the unfunded liabilities that their government has racked up. So you look at where we are, you look at what we're doing to the American people with the spending and the borrowing here in Washington, D.C., and you look at what's happening in Europe, and you can see some real parallels there, Madam President, and it's a path that I hope we will not go down. But it's clear to me, at least, that we continue to try and make promises to people in this country that we can't keep. And when we get to the point, and I think we're there, where the size of government, the growth in our government in this country cannot be supported by our economy, we have got to make some decisions. And those decisions are not going to be easy. But we need to get government back into a more normal historical size relative to our economy, and I think that will help unleash the job creation that we need in this country. And by the way, as I mentioned, the amount of debt that many of these European countries have racked up as a percentage of their GDP, we're not far behind. We're 1-to-1, about 100%. As I said, Greece today is 180%. But if you look at the studies that have been done and how sovereign debt impacts the economy and jobs, there's a clear correlation, a clear connection. A good body of research done by a couple of economists, Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff, have suggested that when you get a debt-to-GDP level that exceeds 90%, and you sustain that, it costs you about a percentage point of economic growth every single year. Well, in this country, when you lose a percentage point of economic growth, it costs you about 1 million jobs. And so these high, sustained, chronic levels of debt to GDP, the ratios that we're at and that we continue to be at today, continue to make it more difficult, I think, for our economy to create jobs. And that coupled, as I said, with all the new requirements that we're imposing on businesses. And I just want to mention a couple of other things in wrapping up here when I talk about those requirements, because in most cases, the forgotten 15 that I mentioned that's been passed by the House of Representatives do focus on some areas that are costing a lot of money in our economy for our job creators. Again, these are 15 bills passed by the House of Representatives, all with bipartisan support, none of which have been taken up and acted on here in the United States Senate. It seems to me at least we ought to at least have votes on these things, and these are things that American businesses are telling us they need to get the economy growing again. But the other thing that we know is making it more difficult, more costly for American businesses to create jobs is the new health care bill. And the Des Moines Register reports that last week, Iowa-based insurer American Enterprise Group announced that it will exit the individual major medical insurance market, making it the 13th company to pull out of some portion of Iowa's health insurance business since June of 2010, mere months after Obamacare passed. As a result, the 35,000 individuals receiving coverage from American Enterprise's individual insurance policies will now lose their current coverage. For these individuals, the promise that you will not have to change plans, nothing will change under the Obama plan except that you will pay less, is once again proven to be hollow. Another example of an insurance company that is moving out of the business, and if you look at the more recent reports about companies that are dropping or talking about dropping coverage, we now know there's a McKinsey & Company report out there that they surveyed a bunch of companies in this country, both large and small. 30% of employers and 28% of large employers will definitely or probably stop offering coverage after 2014. And so all those people who derive their health insurance coverage from their employer or in the individual marketplace are seeing not lower costs but higher costs and probably fewer options. That's the trend that we're seeing. That's the experience so far after the passage of Obamacare, the impact that it's having on American business and American businesses' ability to create jobs in our economy. And so the health care, the heavy weight, the anchor that that's putting on American businesses, coupled with all the other regulations that are coming out of Washington, D.C., coupled with a tax code that is riddled with uncertainty and questions about what's going to happen next in terms of raising taxes on the job creators in this country, focused more on income and wealth redistribution than economic growth, which is where we ought to be focused, suggests that we are headed in the wrong direction. Wrong direction fiscally, wrong direction economically, wrong direction with regard to tax and regulatory policies in this country. But we still have time to change that direction, Madam President, and I would hope that it could start by taking these 15 bills that have passed the House of Representatives and putting them on the floor of the United States Senate for a vote, instead of having yet another political vote, which is what we're going to have this week, that would raise taxes on the people who create jobs in this country to pay for permanently raise taxes, to pay for temporary programs that have proven not to work, as is evidenced by the failed stimulus bill from 2 years ago. We can do better. We can do better by the American people, and we need to. But it's got to start here, and it can start by picking up things that we know have bipartisan support. Madam President, I yield the floor.